Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be painting a company commander for the Astra Militarum. We're going to start things off with some Space Wolves Gray. Now we're going to paint this model a little bit in darker tones because I'm going to be using it as part of my urban infantry defense force that I'm painting up for Armies on Parade this year. So we're going to go a little bit darker colors to kind of fit in with broken down buildings and kind of urban area. Having finished the coat, we're going to switch to some Creed camo, and this is going to be used on the pant legs that you can see just below the cloak. Then we're going to use some Guilliman flesh, and this is going to do 2 light coats over his face. Then we're going to use a little bit of Snakebite leather to go over his boots, as well as his gloves and a couple of little details on his belt. Next, we're going to use some Artisan's Loft Silver. This is going to be used to do a light underlayer on a few of the metallic areas. Now I'm doing this because once we go over these areas with a contrast paint, they'll have a nice light metallic sheen to them. So we're going to be painting the 2 shoulder pads, this kind of metallic tail coming out of the servo skull, the sword, and the shin guards. Once that's done, we're going to use a little bit of Basilicanum Gray. This is going to go over the sword, the servo skull tail, and the rifle. Now I didn't do the silver on the rifle because I wanted it to be kind of a darker matte color just to provide a little bit of contrast from the other metallic areas. Now we're going to use some Artisan Loft Old Gold to paint the halo on the servo skull and a couple of smaller details on the rest of the model. Now this goes on very, very light, so if you happen to be using it, don't be surprised if you need to do 2 or 3 coats to kind of get the color that you want. Now we're going to use some Artist Loft Copper to pick out a few of the small little details in and around parts of the model. This is going to be used to kind of highlight certain areas that I want to draw attention to, but isn't going to be used as heavily as I have in the past on other models. Now we're going to use some black Templar to go over all of the armor plating on the model. So this will be both the shoulder pads and the shin pads. Now using a little bit of Artist Loft Bronze, we're going to go over a couple of other small details. but nothing too crazy. We've got a couple of parts on the servo skull, a few details on the rifle, and one on the sword. This will just help provide a little bit of extra detail and draw the eye a little bit away from some of the more uniform coloration of the model. While that's drying, we're going to go ahead and do a second coat of old gold, just to kind of help it pop out a little bit more. And we'll also use this time to pick out a couple of small details on the belt. Then, using a couple of small coats of skeleton horde, we're going to paint the servo skull. And then touch up a couple of the metallic areas and this little smoke trail with Nuln Oil. And since I forgot it earlier, we're going to finally paint in the belt using Snakebite leather. Now to paint the metals, I used 3 different colors. I used Phthalo Blue, as well as Ultramarine and a Deep Red. Once those were done, I followed up by using the Deep Red to hem the entirety of the greatcoat, and I think this adds a nice little bit of detail without going super crazy or heavy-handed with extra coloration. Once that's dry, we're going to do a coating of Carillion green shade, and this is just going to go on the greatcoat and the hat. While that's drying, we're going to begin stylizing the base. We're just going to do a kind of medium to thin layer of wood glue on the base, and then we're going to begin gluing down some grit and material to kind of begin the transition to a broken road. And to do that, we're going to use a couple of pieces of torn up corkboard, and then coat the rest of the base in a small layer of sand. Once that's dry, we're going to put a little bit of wood glue on one of the cork sections, and then apply a couple of chopped up pieces of cross-stitch mesh to be a little bit of extra rubble. Now I'm not going super crazy with that because it can get to be a little bit much. Now the previous shade ended up being a little bit too blue for my personal liking, so I followed it up with a somewhat light coat of Athonian camo shade. Now I think this helped, but it still didn't quite get the coloration I wanted, but I didn't want to lose any detail on the rest of the model, so I decided to just go with what I had. And now we're going to use some Nuln Oil just to pick out a few details here or there on the model, mostly the metallic bits that were missed. And now a little bit of Rakeland Flesh Shade over his face. And we will follow that up with a bit of Artisloff Gray to paint the cork to serve as pavement. And then follow that up with a light brushing of silver on all of the cross-stitch mesh debris. Off camera, I'll follow this up with a little bit of null oil, just to highlight the shadowed areas on the cross-stitch mesh. And here we are with the finished piece. Alright everyone, this was an interesting one to work with, and didn't quite get the color shading that I had originally wanted, but all in all took about 80 minutes to paint and was a very fun model to work with. So please hit that like button, subscribe for future content, comment in the comments section, and we will see you all next episode.